Soft rain was falling on the quiet streets of Portland that night, the kind that blurs the city lights into trembling rivers of gold. Inside a tiny library at the corner of Maple Street, Emma Lawson sat alone beneath the flicker of a desk lamp. Bills spread out before her like a battlefield she could no longer win. The doctors had called again that afternoon. Her sister's surgery couldn't wait. $180,000 a number that felt colder than winter itself. She'd already sold her car, taken extra shifts, borrowed until her name was worth nothing at the bank. Now, all she had left were long nights, sleepless prayers, and a heart heavy with love and helplessness. Outside, the rain pressed against the window like quiet applause for her breaking point. In that silence, she whispered a question only desperate hearts ever ask. How far would you go to save someone you love? And sometimes, life answers in the strangest ways. A stranger's voice, a promise that sounds too good to be real, a door that opens not to salvation, but to a choice that tests the very core of who you are. That night, Emma didn't know she was walking toward an auction, or that a man she'd never met was about to change everything she believed about worth, dignity, and love. The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the streets of Portland glazed with silver light. The world looked half-awake, sleepy houses, mist curling above the roofs, and the slow hum of a city that hadn't yet decided if it was ready to face another day. Inside a small library on the edge of town, a lamp flickered above a wooden desk. Emma Lawson sat there, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by stacks of returned books waiting to be sorted. The air smelled faintly of paper and dust, the kind of scent that clung to people who spent more time with stories than with life itself. She was supposed to clock out an hour ago, but her body had forgotten what off work meant. There were bills tucked between the pages of a dictionary on her desk, hospital forms in her purse, and a single photo taped to the computer screen, a girl with freckles and a lopsided grin. Lily, her sister, 22. The reason Emma kept breathing when everything else told her to give up. A drop of water fell from her hair onto the photo, not from the rain, but from her own tears. She hadn't even noticed she was crying again. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Another unpaid hour. Another prayer that no one was listening to. She rubbed her temples and opened the small envelope she had been carrying for days, the hospital's latest estimate. $180,000. She'd already read it 100 times, yet it still knocked the air out of her lungs. Emma had tried everything: bank loans, selling her car, working 2 shifts at once. She'd cleaned offices after midnight, cataloged books till dawn, but every check she wrote felt like throwing stones into an endless well. She once believed that doing everything right, working hard, being kind, staying honest would protect her. But life had a cruel way of showing her that goodness didn't always pay the bills. The library's old heater buzzed to life, shaking the silence. Emma reached for her coat, then froze when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Still here. Honey, it was Nancy Turner, the senior librarian, 60-something, gray hair tied in a bun, always smelling faintly of lavender and old paper. She'd been Emma's mentor, her comfort, almost a mother figure since their first day working together. Emma smiled weakly. Couldn't sleep? Thought I'd get a head start on the morning returns. Nancy looked at her for a long time, the kind of look that could read the pages you tried to keep hidden. You look tired, dear. And I don't just mean the kind coffee can fix. Emma's laugh was soft, almost apologetic. I'm fine. Nancy didn't believe her. Is it about Lily again? The way she said the name made Emma's throat tighten. She nodded, barely. They're scheduling surgery next month. I still don't have enough. Nancy pulled up a chair beside her. How much are we talking? Emma hesitated, then whispered, 180,000. Nancy whistled under her breath. That's not small money. Sweetheart, I know. Emma's voice cracked, the words barely leaving her lips. I've already done everything I can. I've borrowed. I've sold. There's nothing left. For a while, they just sat in silence, 2 women, one young, one old, both shaped by the quiet ache of trying to hold life together. Outside, the rain started again, tapping softly against the window pane. Nancy finally spoke, her tone hesitant. "There's something I heard about. Might sound strange." Emma looked up. "Strange an event," Nancy said carefully. "In Seattle. Kind of private. The people who go there have more money than they know what to do with. They bid on experiences, dinners, charity outings, sometimes companionship for a night, nothing illegal, just unusual." Emma frowned. "You mean like an auction of sorts?" Nancy sighed. "They call it social philanthropy. Some say it's harmless, others not so much. But I heard they pay big money. Life-changing kind of money." Emma stared at the flickering lamp, her chest tightening. The word auction echoed in her mind like thunder. "That's not me, Nancy." "I know," the older woman said softly. "But neither is watching your sister fade because the world charges too much to save her." The words hit hard. Emma pressed her palms against her knees, feeling the tremor in her hands. She didn't answer, couldn't. Nancy stood, placing a wrinkled card on the table. "The woman who runs it, Adeline Pierce. Well, she knows how to make things happen. Just think about it. No one needs to know." When she left, the library felt impossibly quiet. Emma sat still for a long time, the card untouched before her. Emerald Crown Hotel, Seattle. A phone number written in elegant cursive. She tried to laugh a small, broken sound. The idea was absurd. Her. At some high society auction, she didn't even own shoes that matched. But then she pictured Lily again, the girl who loved summer fairs, strawberry milkshakes, and sleeping with the lights on because she was afraid of the dark. Emma imagined losing that light. The heater clicked off. The clock ticked on. She took the card and slipped it into her pocket, not as a decision, but as a possibility, a seed of something she didn't yet have the courage to name. When she finally stepped outside, the air was cold and damp. Streetlights shimmered in puddles, turning the asphalt into broken mirrors. Emma pulled her coat tighter around her and walked the long mile home. Each step echoed softly, steady, stubborn. She didn't know where hope ended and desperation began anymore. But as she crossed the empty street, a faint glow caught her eye, a billboard flickering above a bus stop. It was an ad for the Emerald Crown Hotel, its golden letters shining through the fog like a whisper from another world. Emma stopped, staring up at it for a long time. Sometimes, the universe doesn't shout. Sometimes, it just leaves a light on, waiting for you to notice. And in that quiet moment, with the rain gently falling again, Emma Lawson realized that her life was standing at the edge of something she couldn't yet understand. Something that would change everything. The next evening, the city felt colder than usual, not from the weather, but from the kind of chill that lives inside you when life keeps asking for more than you can give. Emma walked out of the library, her bag heavy with returned books and unpaid bills folded between the pages. Streetlights hummed quietly, throwing pale halos over the wet pavement. Her shoes made soft splashes in the puddles as she crossed the parking lot. Nancy's card was still in her pocket, a small rectangle of paper that somehow weighed more than anything she carried. She reached the bus stop and sat down, the bench damp beneath her, around her. The world went on, cars rushed past, windows glowed with dinner lights. Someone laughed in the distance. Ordinary life, the kind that now felt unreachable. Emma stared at her reflection in the dark glass of the bus shelter. Tired eyes, wind-tangled hair, the kind of face that had forgotten what rest looked like. When the bus came, she almost didn't get on. Her body moved out of habit, not intention. The ride home was quiet, just the low hum of the engine and the whisper of rain against the windows. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, replaying Nancy's voice. "It's all legal, honey, just different. The word lingered like perfume she didn't want to wear. She pictured polished rooms, men in suits, champagne glasses, women who looked nothing like her. What business did she have there? Yet, beneath the shame and doubt, A faint pulse of hope beat stubbornly like a spark refusing to die. By the time she reached her small apartment, the city had gone still. She unlocked the door quietly, not wanting to wake Lily. The living room smelled faintly of vanilla and medicine. On the couch, under a knitted blanket, her sister slept, curled up like a child. Her hair had started to fall out in places, but her face peaceful. Even in sleep was still the most beautiful thing Emma had ever seen. Emma knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand from her forehead. "I'm working on it. Lil," she whispered, "I promise." Her eyes caught the stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter. Past due notices, reminders, warnings, all written in polite, unforgiving ink. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down, staring at the phone. The card was still in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, turning it between her fingers. Emerald Crown Hotel, Seattle. The name alone sounded like something from another planet. She traced the number with her thumb. A voice inside her whispered, "Don't!" But another voice, smaller, softer, more desperate, whispered back, "What if this is the only way?" Emma placed the phone on the table. Her heart thudded hard enough to drown the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then, before she could change her mind, she dialed. The line rang once, twice. Then a woman's voice answered, smooth, calm, with a tone that carried quiet authority. "Emerald Crown. This is Adeline Pierce speaking." Emma swallowed hard. "Hi, I was given your number by Nancy Turner. She said you might have opportunities." A brief pause. Then, Nancy? Yes, I remember her. You must be Emma Lawson." The way she said her name made Emma sit up straighter. "Yes, ma'am." Adeline's voice was gentle but precise, each word polished like glass. "You understand what kind of event this is?" "Dear, I think so." She said, "It's for charity." "That's one way to see it," Adeline replied, her tone unreadable. "It's a private gathering. Discretion is essential. The participants are carefully selected, and every arrangement is consensual, respectable, and lawful. But it is not for the faint of heart." Emma hesitated. "And people are paid. They are compensated," Adeline said simply, "for their time, their company, their story. You see, my clients believe that companionship, in its truest form, is art, and art deserves value." Emma's mouth went dry. I don't have experience with." Adeline interrupted softly. "You have compassion. Miss Lawson, you have grace. I can hear it in your voice. That's more than most can offer." The words startled her, not because of what they meant, but because no one had said something kind to her in a very long time. "Would you like to come in for an interview?" Adeline asked. "Nothing binding, just a conversation." Emma gripped the edge of the table. "Yes, I think I would." "Good. Bring a simple dress, something that feels like you. The Emerald Crown Hotel. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock sharp. Ask for me at the reception. And Miss Lawson." "Yes." "Don't apologize for needing help. Even the strongest people do." The call ended. Emma sat in silence, the dial tone fading into the hum of the refrigerator. She stared at her reflection in the window, rain streaking down the glass, city lights bending through it like liquid gold. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely numb. Terrified, yes, but also awake. The next day passed in fragments. Work, coffee, words exchanged with coworkers that barely landed. She moved through it all like a shadow, her mind fixed on the evening at 5:30. She stood in front of her mirror, brushing her hair until it lay smooth enough to hide the tremor in her hands. She put on a navy blue dress she'd worn once to a cousin's wedding, modest, a little faded, but still hers. The hem brushed just below her knees. She added small pearl earrings, the only jewelry she owned. The bus ride to Seattle was quiet. She watched the scenery blur past pine trees, gas stations, the gray stretch of highway. Each mile felt like crossing an invisible line, leaving behind the version of herself she'd always known. When she arrived, the Emerald Crown Hotel looked like something from another world, glass walls glimmering under the evening rain, marble steps leading up to golden doors. Inside, chandeliers spilled light like champagne. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished stone. At the reception desk, a woman in a black suit greeted her with a practiced smile. "Miss Lawson, Mrs. Pierce is expecting you. This way, please." They walked through a hallway lined with mirrors. In each reflection, Emma saw a woman she barely recognized, small, nervous, but still standing. Adeline Pierce awaited her in a private lounge, seated beside a grand piano. She was elegant, silver hair swept into a chignon, eyes sharp but kind. "Emma," she said warmly. "You came?" Emma nodded. "I almost didn't." Adeline smiled, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "That's how most beginnings feel. Sit." "My dear." They spoke for a long time about Lily, about struggle, about choices no one should have to make. Adeline listened without judgment, only quiet understanding. Then, finally, she handed Emma a sealed envelope. "This is the contract," she said. "If you choose to participate, you'll appear at tomorrow night's auction. I assure you, your dignity will remain untouched. What you offer is presence, nothing more." Emma's hands trembled as she took the envelope. She didn't open it yet. She couldn't. Adeline studied her with a knowing gaze. "Life tests us, Miss Lawson. Sometimes it asks for courage we didn't know we had." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the city. Emma looked toward the tall windows, where rain streaked down like silver threads. She knew she was standing at a crossroad. One path led to everything she feared, the other to losing everything she loved. Her breath came slow, shallow. Then, softly, she said, "I'll think about it." Adeline smiled. "That's all I ask." As Emma stepped out into the rain again, the city lights shimmered through her tears. She didn't know if they were tears of fear or hope. Maybe both. But somewhere deep inside, she felt it a shift, small but real, the kind that comes before a storm. The rain didn't stop for 3 nights. It came and went like a restless thought tapping softly on the window, pausing, then returning again. Emma barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her sister's face under the hospital lights, pale and fragile, her small hand reaching out as if to say, "Don't give up on me." And so Emma didn't. She lay awake in the dark, listening to the sound of her own breathing, caught between 2 impossible choices, her pride and her love. On the 3rd night, she made tea she never drank, watched the steam fade into nothing, and realized she was already standing on the edge. Pride couldn't pay for surgeries. Dignity didn't save lives. She whispered a prayer to no one in particular and picked up the envelope Adeline had given her. The paper was thick, the kind that smelled faintly of money and decisions you couldn't take back. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. There were rules, clauses, promises written in clean, unfeeling language. The words blurred as she read confidentiality, appearance, compensation, no obligations beyond the agreed presence. Every line felt like a whisper of temptation wrapped in politeness. At the bottom, a blank space waited for her signature. She stared at it for a long time, then set the pen down and walked to the window. Outside, Portland slept. A single streetlight flickered over the empty sidewalk. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, her sister dreamed in pain. Emma pressed her forehead against the cold glass and whispered, "I'm sorry, Lily." Then she turned back, picked up the pen, and signed her name. The next morning was quiet, too quiet. Even the world seemed to be holding its breath. Emma packed her one good dress, the navy blue one, and a pair of black flats that still shone faintly if you looked at them in kind light. She left a note for Lily on the kitchen counter. "Going to fix everything. Be brave for me." The bus ride to Seattle felt longer than before. The sky was a sheet of gray, the kind that made the world look washed out and distant. She kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, fingers cold despite her gloves. At every stop, she almost changed her mind. But every time she thought of turning back, she saw the hospital bill again, and the thought hardened inside her chest like stone. When she finally arrived at the Emerald Crown Hotel, the lobby shimmered under crystal chandeliers. It smelled faintly of white lilies and rain-soaked coats. Adeline Pierce was waiting near the grand staircase, dressed in charcoal gray, her presence calm and assured, like someone who had seen 1,000 desperate hearts before and knew exactly how to steady them. "Emma," she greeted softly. "You came?" Emma nodded, her voice small. "I signed the papers." Adeline's smile was gentle, approving. "Good. Then let's make sure you understand everything before tomorrow night." They walked through the quiet hallways together. Adeline spoke in low tones about schedules, expectations, the importance of composure. Her words were practical, but her eyes carried something almost maternal. "You must remember," she said, "you are not for sale. You are simply offering a moment of grace to those who have forgotten what sincerity looks like. Hold your head high, no matter who's watching." The words sank deep into Emma, both comfort and warning. In a private office upstairs, Adeline reviewed the contract with her once more. Emma signed the final page with steady hands, though her heart beat like a drum beneath her ribs. Adeline slid an envelope across the desk, a check made out to the hospital in Lily's name. The number printed on it made Emma's breath catch. "It's all here," Adeline said. "The hospital will be notified by morning. You can call to confirm." Emma's eyes filled before she could stop them. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," Adeline replied. "Just remember why you're doing this." Hold on to that. For the first time in months, relief washed through her heavy, dizzying, almost unbearable. She clutched the envelope like something holy. As she left Adeline's office, the elevator doors opened to the grand lobby below. She caught sight of herself reflected in the mirrored walls, the same navy dress, the same nervous hands, but something about her looked different, like a woman on the edge of becoming someone else. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement, painting gold ribbons under her feet. She stepped out beneath the awning, breathing in the damp night air. For a brief second, she thought of running, of tearing up the contract, of pretending this had never happened. But then her phone buzzed. It was the hospital. The payment had gone through. Lily's surgery was scheduled. Emma pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her knees nearly gave way as she sank onto the marble step, letting silent tears fall, a mix of relief, fear, and something she couldn't name. For the rest of the night, she wandered the streets near the hotel, too restless to go home, too afraid to face herself in the mirror. She watched couples walk by, dressed in coats and laughter, the kind of people who didn't know what it felt like to sell tomorrow just to save today. When dawn broke, the city softened, cafes opened, lights flickered on, and the first scent of coffee drifted through the air. Emma found herself standing across from the hotel again. She looked up at its tall glass facade, elegant, silent, indifferent, and knew there was no turning back now. She walked inside, up to the same front desk, and the clerk smiled politely. "Good morning, Miss Lawson. Mrs. Pierce asked me to give you this." It was a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate bracelet of silver pearls, simple, understated, but beautiful. A note beneath it read, "For tomorrow, to remind you that even courage can tremble." Emma traced the pearls with her fingertips. They were cool against her skin, grounding her. Back in her hotel room, she placed the bracelet on the nightstand beside the window. She stood there for a long time, watching the morning light dance across the city. Somewhere far away, Lily would be waking soon, maybe smiling for the first time in days. That thought steadied her heartbeat. If only a little, she whispered to herself. Just one night, then it's over. The words hung in the air like a fragile promise. Outside, the city hummed awake, unaware that somewhere inside its glittering heart, a young woman was preparing to trade her fear for a chance at love, loss, and everything in between. And as the first sunlight broke through the clouds, Emma closed her eyes and breathed in. It was the kind of breath that comes right before everything changes. The chandeliers glowed like 100 quiet suns, their reflections trembling in crystal glasses filled halfway with golden wine. Soft music floated through the air, something classical, distant, almost unreal. From the corner of the grand ballroom, Emma stood still, trying to remember how to breathe. The satin of her navy blue dress whispered against her skin as she smoothed the fabric down for what felt like the 100th time. It wasn't new, not luxurious like the others, but it was hers. And tonight, it had to be enough. Adeline had told her the rules that afternoon. Smile softly, don't look down. When your name is called, walk forward. The rest will unfold on its own. Easy words, impossible instructions. Behind the curtain, the air was heavy with perfume and nerves. Dozens of women stood in line, each wearing a different shade of hope, red for boldness, silver for grace, black for mystery. Emma's was blue, the color of quiet seas and hidden storms. A man with a calm voice announced the next name on stage. Applause followed, polite and practiced. Emma could feel her heartbeat matching the rhythm of the auctioneer's tone, climbing and falling with every bid. Numbers flew like arrows: 40,000, 60, 75. Laughter rippled, champagne glasses clinked, and then another name was called: Emma Lawson. She felt her stomach drop. Adeline gave a small nod from the sidelines, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. Emma stepped out, one foot in front of the other, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The light hit her face, warm and blinding. For a second, she saw nothing, only the shimmer of gold, the blur of faces behind the glare. She told herself to breathe, one breath in, one breath out. The crowd murmured, curious. She was different, not painted, not polished, not dressed to impress. Something about her simplicity made the room lean forward. The auctioneer began, his tone smooth and steady. We'll start at $40,000. A paddle rose, 40. Another followed, 50, then 60. The numbers climbed quickly. Emma stood still, her hands folded in front of her, the soft pulse of disbelief rising in her throat. The sound of bidding blurred into the hum of her own heartbeat. She tried not to look at anyone, but her gaze drifted faces, suits, glittering eyes, a world she'd never belonged to and never meant to. At 120,000, someone laughed. At 150, another voice challenged. By 200, the energy in the room shifted, less curiosity now, more competition. Emma could feel it in the air, the strange thrill of people fighting over something they didn't even know. Then came silence. The auctioneer lifted his chin. 200,000 going once. Before he could finish, a voice broke through the quiet, deep, calm, unhurried. From the far end of the room, 400,000. It wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of voice that didn't need volume to be heard. The crowd turned, almost as one. Even the music paused. Emma's breath caught. She couldn't see his face clearly. The light didn't reach that far, only the outline of a man in a dark suit, seated with a stillness that felt deliberate. His paddle rested loosely in his hand, as though money meant nothing and meaning was the only thing he'd come for. The auctioneer blinked, clearly thrown off. 400,000, are we? No one else spoke, not a single paddle rose. Sold, he said finally, his voice softer than before. To Mr. Hale. The applause came late, uncertain, like everyone was afraid to disturb the spell that had just settled over the room. Emma stood frozen, unsure if she should smile, bow, or run. Adeline's hand appeared at her shoulder, gentle, guiding her off the stage, back behind the curtain. The other women whispered half admiration, half disbelief. 400,000. Emma sat down on the velvet bench, her knees weak, her mind raced. Relief, fear, confusion all tangled into one dizzy breath. Adeline crouched beside her, eyes soft. "It's done, my dear. You did beautifully." Emma swallowed hard. Who is he?" Adeline glanced toward the curtain where the man had been. "Ethan Hale," she said quietly. "Tech magnate, reclusive, brilliant. Impossible to reach except, apparently, by you." The name meant nothing to Emma, though she noticed the way people whispered it with a mix of awe and unease. She couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. In one night, with one bid, her world had changed again. She followed Adeline down a long corridor lit with golden sconces. At the end, a small room waited quiet, private, lined with dark wood and the faint scent of cedar. Adeline gestured toward a chair. He requested a brief meeting, just a conversation. Emma's pulse stuttered. Now. The door opened before she could answer. He stepped inside, tall, composed, wearing a black suit that fit him like it had been made for his bones. His presence filled the space before his words did. His eyes, a deep gray, scanned the room, calm, sharp, unreadable before landing on her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he said, simply, "Miss Lawson." Emma rose, unsure whether to shake his hand. "Mr. Hale," she replied softly. He studied her, not unkindly, just curious. "I don't attend events like this," he said, "but when I saw you walk on that stage—" He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I realize there are moments when you don't buy what's offered. You try to protect what shouldn't be for sale." Emma frowned slightly, not sure she understood. "Protect." He nodded once. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone honest, before this world made her believe she had to be anything else." She didn't know how to respond. So she said the only thing that felt true: "I didn't belong up there." A faint smile touched his lips. "No, and that's exactly why you did." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just fragile, like something beginning to take shape between two people who hadn't expected to meet. He turned to Adeline. "Transfer the full amount to the hospital fund she mentioned, directly. I'll take care of the rest." Adeline inclined her head. "Of course, Mr. Hale." Emma stared, stunned. "Wait, you knew about Lily." He met her eyes. "Adeline told me enough. You don't owe me anything. Miss Lawson, consider this a contract of respect, not ownership." Her throat tightened. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because," he said quietly, "I remember what it feels like to be desperate for something good." The words landed softly but deeply. Before she could find a reply, he nodded once and turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, looking back just long enough to say, "Rest. You'll need it. Tomorrow. We talk about what comes next." The door closed behind him, leaving the faint scent of rain and cedar in the air. Emma sat there, the bracelet on her wrist glinting faintly in the light. Her reflection shimmered in the window pane, the same woman, and yet, somehow not. Outside, the storm had passed. The city slept under a sky washed clean. And in that quiet moment, Emma realized that sometimes salvation doesn't arrive like light breaking through the dark. Sometimes it walks into a room, looks you in the eye, and offers you a chance to start again. The night after the auction, the rain returned softer this time, almost tender, as if the sky itself wanted to cool the weight of what had just happened. Emma sat in the quiet lounge of the Emerald Crown, the faint hum of jazz filling the air. The world outside the tall glass windows looked blurred, drenched in gold and gray. She held a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her reflection shimmering faintly against the dark glass. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. Maybe to wake up. Maybe to feel something other than confusion. The door opened behind her. The sound was quiet, yet it pulled her back to herself. When she turned, he was there. Ethan Hale, the man from the shadows, from the $400,000 silence. He walked in without hurry, his presence steady, unforced, the kind that filled a room without asking permission. Up close, he looked younger than she expected, 30-something, maybe mid-30s, but his eyes carried the kind of stillness that only comes from surviving too much. "Miss Lawson," he said. His voice was low, smooth, with a calm authority that made her heart skip. "May I?" She nodded, and he took the seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The space between them hummed with unspoken questions. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology. That kind of event isn't where someone like you belongs." Emma blinked. "Someone like me." His gaze softened. "Someone who still believes kindness is worth something." The words made her chest tighten. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she said. "I know what desperation looks like. I've lived there." Emma studied him. His suit was perfectly tailored. His watch gleamed faintly under the light. Everything about him screamed control. And yet, behind the polish, there was something raw, something fragile, like a man who'd built walls too high, even for himself. "I didn't buy you," he said suddenly, cutting through her thoughts. "I only made sure no one else could." She frowned. "Why?" He leaned back, hands clasped loosely. "Because you didn't belong on that stage, being measured and priced like a thing. You didn't look afraid, you looked out of place, as if you were the only real thing in a room full of masks." Emma felt her cheeks warm. "You don't even know me." "That's true," he said, "but I know the look of someone pretending to be fine." A long pause followed. Outside, thunder murmured far away. Inside, the music shifted to something slower. Emma glanced down at her cup. "So, what happens now?" Ethan hesitated, then reached into his coat and placed a folder on the table. "The money's already transferred to the hospital. Your sister's surgery is covered. There's nothing you owe me." She stared at the folder like it might disappear if she blinked. I don't understand. Why would you do that for me?" His expression didn't change. "Because sometimes helping someone else is the only way to remember we're still human." Emma's breath caught. There was something lonely in the way he said it, like the words came from a wound that had never quite healed. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Gratitude wasn't enough. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "That doesn't feel like enough. But, thank you." Ethan looked at her, really looked, and something softened in his eyes. "Just promise me one thing," he said quietly. "Never stand on a stage like that again." She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "I won't." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Good. I'll have my driver take you home." "And Miss Lawson?" She met his gaze. He smiled faintly, a rare, tired kind of smile. "Sometimes dignity isn't about what the world lets you keep. It's about what you refuse to sell." The words stayed with her long after he left. That night, Emma rode back to Portland in silence. The driver didn't ask questions. The city lights passed like quiet ghosts through the car window, painting her reflection in fleeting gold. She pressed her forehead to the glass, letting her breath fog the surface. Her phone buzzed once, a message from the hospital: payment received, surgery confirmed. She closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely this time. They didn't sting. They felt clean. When the car stopped in front of her building, she thanked the driver and stepped out into the drizzle. The air smelled like wet earth and new beginnings. She walked upstairs, careful not to wake Lily, and slipped quietly into the small apartment. Her sister slept peacefully on the couch, the soft rhythm of her breathing the only sound in the room. Emma knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's going to be okay now," she whispered. "I promise." For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe it. The next morning, she woke to sunlight spilling through the blinds. The world looked almost gentle again. She made coffee, fed the cat, and tried to act normal, whatever normal meant anymore. But every so often, her mind drifted back to him, the man with the quiet voice and the haunted eyes. Ethan Hale. The name sounded like a secret. She wondered what kind of life could make someone so generous and yet so guarded. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her: pity, curiosity, or maybe something she couldn't name. Later that afternoon, a small package arrived at her door. No sender, no return address. Inside was a note written in clean, elegant handwriting. For your sister, from someone who believes in second chances. Beneath it, 2 tickets to a private medical transport service, all expenses paid, from Portland to the hospital in Seattle. Emma held the note for a long time, her thumb tracing the ink. A quiet smile tugged at her lips, the kind that belonged to both gratitude and disbelief. The world, she thought, can still surprise you. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain again. She looked out the window, past the rooftops, toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the gray stretch of sky, there was a man who'd changed her life with a single sentence: "I didn't buy you." And as the clouds began to part, a thin ray of sunlight slipped through, landing right on the hospital bill she had pinned to the fridge. The numbers were still there, but for the first time, they didn't look like a threat. They looked like a door that had finally opened. The rain had finally given way to sunlight when Emma received the call. She was sitting in the hospital waiting room, Lily asleep beside her, the faint rhythm of the monitors steady and calm, the sound of hope. Fragile but alive. It had been 2 days since the transfer cleared, 2 days since Ethan Hale disappeared back into whatever world he came from. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. But that morning, her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. Miss Lawson. The voice on the other end was smooth, deliberate. Ethan, even through the line, he sounded like someone who measured his words carefully, as if each one had to earn its place. "Yes," she said softly, her pulse quickening. "I hope your sister's recovering well. She's stable now. The doctors think she'll be ready for surgery by next week. I don't know how to," he interrupted gently. I told you, this isn't charity. It's a choice. My choice." There was a pause, the quiet kind that carries weight. Then he said, "There's something I'd like to discuss with you, a proposal, of sorts." Emma hesitated. "A proposal?" "Not what you think," he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Strictly professional. Would you be willing to meet me at Hale Industries tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock? Her eyes drifted toward Lily, still sleeping peacefully. She whispered, "I'll be there." The next morning, she stood before the towering glass structure of Hale Industries, a building that looked like it had grown straight out of the clouds. The letters of his name gleamed across the marble facade, bold and cold. Inside, everything was sleek and silent, the air faintly scented with cedar and coffee. A receptionist guided her to the top floor. As the elevator rose, her reflection shimmered in the mirrored walls, a small figure dressed neatly in her best blouse, clutching a borrowed handbag. She tried to steady her breathing, but the higher the elevator climbed, the smaller she felt. When the doors opened, Ethan was already waiting by the window, hands in his pockets. The city sprawled behind him like a painting. He turned as she entered, offering a quiet nod. "Emma," he said simply, "thank you for coming." She gave a polite smile. "I didn't think I'd hear from you again. I don't usually reach out," he admitted, "but I have a situation that might need someone like you." "Someone like me," she echoed. He gestured for her to sit. The table between them was glass, reflecting both of their faces in the same thin layer of light. "I have a series of events coming up: international conferences, fundraisers, business gatherings. My advisors insist I bring a companion. Someone respectable, articulate, but unconnected to my industry. Someone real." Emma blinked. "You mean you want me to pretend to be my guest?" He finished. "For 6 weeks, nothing more." She studied him carefully. "Why me?" "Because you don't play games," he said. "You speak like you mean it. That's rare in my world." Emma hesitated. "Mr. Hale, I don't belong in places like that. I'm just a librarian. I don't know anything about corporate dinners or whatever those people talk about. His expression softened slightly. You underestimate yourself. You listen to me without asking for anything. That alone puts you ahead of most of the people I deal with. She looked down at her hands. What would you expect from me exactly? Your presence, he said simply. Your honesty. I'll handle the rest. He slid a folder toward her. Inside was a contract, concise, elegant, almost unnervingly clear. At the bottom, the terms were printed neatly. 6 weeks of accompaniment across designated events, compensation and travel provided, no obligations of personal nature, full discretion required. Emma's throat tightened. This is a lot to take in. I know, he said, which is why you should think before you decide. But understand this, the offer isn't about charity. It's about trust. She looked up. And if I say no, then we part ways with respect, he said without hesitation. And you'll still owe me nothing. The honesty in his voice startled her. There was no manipulation, no pressure, just truth, quiet and steady. She nodded slowly. Why 6 weeks? He smiled faintly. That's how long my board needs to finalize a merger in Europe. After that, I can stop pretending I care about appearances. A small laugh escaped her, soft but real. You don't like people much, do you? He met her gaze, a hint of irony in his eyes. I like sincerity. People tend to avoid that. For the first time, she felt the air between them shift lighter, almost familiar. She realized that beneath the armor of power and wealth, there was a man who understood loneliness too well. Finally, she exhaled. All right, she said quietly. I'll do it. He extended his hand, then it settled. When their palms met, she noticed the warmth in his skin, steady but cautious like someone afraid of breaking something fragile. He stood, returning to the window. You'll receive the itinerary tonight. And Emma. She paused at the door. He looked back, his voice low but firm. Whatever happens in these next 6 weeks, there will be respect, always. Something in the way he said it, not as reassurance, but as a vow, made her believe him. Later, as she rode the elevator down, her reflection caught the morning light again. This time, she didn't look small, just uncertain but standing. Outside, the wind was cool and alive. She walked past the fountain at the front plaza, where sunlight scattered across the rippling water. She reached into her bag, fingers brushing against the folded contract. It felt heavy, yet somehow clean, like a choice she hadn't been forced into, but made herself. When she got home, Lily was awake, smiling weakly from the couch. You look different. Her sister teased. Emma smiled. Maybe I am. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Emma sat by the window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ethan Hale was probably doing the same, both of them caught in the quiet space between duty and longing. She touched her wrist where his handshake still lingered. 6 weeks. A lifetime could fit inside that, if she wasn't careful. And as the first raindrop traced its path down the glass, Emma whispered to herself, half fear, half hope. Let's see who we become. The elevator hummed softly as it rose through the glass tower of Hale Industries. From where she stood, Emma could see the city stretch below Seattle in all its gray majesty, a quilt of lights and rain and movement. But inside, it was silent, the kind of silence that didn't comfort, the kind that watched, the kind that made you aware of your own breathing. Ethan stood beside her, his reflection sharp against the mirrored wall, hands in his pockets, eyes on the city below. He hadn't said much that morning, just a quiet greeting and a nod toward the car waiting outside her apartment. Now, in the confined space between glass and steel, Emma felt like she'd stepped into a world built for people who'd forgotten how to be human. When the doors slid open, the air changed. It was colder here, polished marble, silver accents, the faint hum of machines somewhere behind the walls. The space was all precision, no warmth, no fingerprints. "This is where you work?" she asked softly, walking beside him through the long corridor lined with frosted glass. He nodded. "Most days, it feels—" She paused, searching for the word, lonely. A small smile touched his lips, though it never reached his eyes. "You get used to it." She didn't answer, but the truth sat heavy in the air. Some places weren't meant to be gotten used to. He led her into his office. It was vast, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sound, the light reflecting off steel beams and rain-streaked glass. On his desk, everything was in order. A laptop, 2 pens, one framed photo turned face down. Emma's gaze lingered there. "You keep your windows clean, but your picture hidden," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, startled for half a second, then followed her eyes. "Some memories aren't worth displaying." She nodded, sensing the ache beneath his calm. He gestured for her to sit, and for a few moments, the only sound was the soft ticking of a clock that didn't seem to belong in such a modern room. Then, without warning, he spoke. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything you built?" Emma blinked. "I've lost things," she said gently, "but not like that. I think—" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the rain against the glass. 10 years ago, I wasn't this man. I was ambitious, reckless young enough to believe that success was proof of worth. I built my first company from my apartment. For a while, it worked. We grew fast, too fast, and then it all fell apart. Investors pulled out. I was accused of fraud I didn't commit. Overnight, I went from a man with everything to someone people crossed the street to avoid. His tone was calm, but Emma could hear the crack beneath it. "And her?" she asked softly, nodding toward the photo. He hesitated. "Caroline." The name hung between them like smoke. "She was my fiancée, my best friend. I thought she'd stand by me." He gave a short laugh, empty of humor. 2 months later, she married my business partner, the same man who turned on me to save himself. Emma's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." His eyes returned to the city below. "That was the day I stopped expecting anything from people. It makes life easier when you keep your heart out of it." She wanted to say something, to bridge that small, aching distance between them, but she knew what heartbreak looked like, the kind that doesn't fade, only quiets. So she stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. After a while, he turned to her again. "What about you?" "Emma Lawson." "What made you decide to walk into that auction hall?" She met his gaze. Desperation. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Desperation makes us honest. Or dangerous," she added softly. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe recognition. "You see things clearly," he said. "Sometimes too clearly," she replied, a small smile playing at her lips. He looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time she saw the man behind the name, not the billionaire, not the recluse, but someone standing quietly in the wreckage of what used to be trust. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For not looking at me the way others do. Like I'm a story they've already decided the ending for." She tilted her head. "Maybe because I've been on the other side of that look." Silence again. But this one felt different, softer, almost healing. Ethan stood and walked to the window. The rain had eased, leaving streaks of silver light across the skyline. "Do you believe people can change?" "Emma?" She thought about Lily, about the nights she'd cried alone, about how close she'd come to losing hope. "I think we don't change who we are," she said quietly. "We just remember what we forgot." He turned toward her, studying her face like he was memorizing it. "You talk like someone who's lived 3 lives already." "Maybe I have," she said. "Or maybe I just pay attention." He smiled then, a real one, brief but unguarded. It lit something in the room, something human. The intercom buzzed, breaking the moment. His assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Hale, your board meeting in 15 minutes." "Thank you," he said, pressing the button. Then, to Emma, "Will you stay? There's a dinner tonight, nothing formal, just a small team gathering. I'd like you there." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He gave her a look, not demanding, not expectant, simply honest. It would make the evening less corporate. She smiled softly. "Then I'll stay." As she stood to leave, he called after her. "Emma." She turned. He was by the window again, the city light drawing sharp lines across his face. "If anyone asks why you're here, tell them you're my reminder." She frowned slightly. Of what he looked out over the skyline, his voice barely above a whisper, "that I'm still capable of decency." The words lingered long after she left his office. That night, as she stood by the elevator, Emma looked back through the glass wall. Ethan was still there, hands in his pockets, staring into the distance, a man surrounded by everything, yet haunted by what he'd lost. And in that quiet moment, she understood something unspoken between them two people, both broken in different ways, somehow finding comfort in each other's silence. Outside, the city lights shimmered like falling stars, and somewhere deep inside her, Emma felt the first hint of something dangerous and tender, all at once the quiet beginning of trust. The night air of San Francisco carried a soft chill, the kind that whispered through the trees and made the city lights flicker like distant stars. From the balcony of the Fairmont Hotel, Emma could see the Golden Gate Bridge stretching across the bay, a ribbon of gold laid gently over dark water. It was her first business trip with Ethan, her first time pretending to belong in a world that didn't speak her language. The day had been a blur: meetings, cameras, handshakes, polite smiles. Ethan had introduced her to people whose names she'd only ever seen in newspapers: CEOs, investors, people who wore confidence like perfume. She'd stood beside him, trying to remember when to nod, when to smile, when to stay silent. Miss Lawson. "You must be the reason Ethan's finally showing up to these events." Someone had joked over champagne. Emma had blushed, stammered something about being his +1, and spilled half her drink in the process. Laughter followed, polite, but sharp at the edges. She'd wanted to disappear then, but Ethan's hand had found hers under the table, steady and firm. "She's not my +1, he'd said evenly, looking straight at the man who'd laughed. "She's the reason I'm here." The room had gone quiet for a beat. Then the conversation shifted elsewhere, but the warmth of his hand stayed long after. Now, hours later, Emma stood by the balcony railing, her hair pulled back loosely, the night brushing against her skin. Inside, the ballroom lights glowed golden and distant. She could still hear the faint hum of music and laughter behind her, but she needed air and space to breathe. Footsteps approached softly. "You disappeared," Ethan said, his voice calm, threaded with something she couldn't name. "I needed a minute," she admitted. "I think I used up my lifetime supply of small talk today." He smiled faintly, stepping beside her. "You did well. I spilled wine on a senator." "He deserved it," he said dryly, and she laughed, the sound light and unguarded. It drifted into the night air like something precious. They stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the city. The water below shimmered under the moonlight, restless and alive. "Why do people like that matter so much to you?" she asked quietly. "They don't," he said, "but the company does. And sometimes, you have to stand beside people you don't trust to protect the ones who depend on you." She looked at him then, really looked at the calm mask he wore so easily, at the faint line between his brows, the tension that never quite left his shoulders. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. He didn't answer at first. Then, in a tone almost too quiet for the wind to carry, he said, "It is." Something in the honesty of it broke her heart a little. After a while, he asked, "Do you ever think about what you'd be doing if things had been different?" She smiled sadly. "Every day. Maybe I'd still be working at the library. Maybe Lily would be planning her next semester instead of recovering from surgery. Maybe I wouldn't have met you." Ethan turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the faint light from the bay. "And would that be a good thing? I don't know." she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think maybe we both needed to find each other. Even if it wasn't in the way we expected, the words lingered, soft as the sound of the tide. He rested his hands on the railing, his fingers brushing against hers. There was a time, he said, when I believed that love was simple. You find someone, you give them everything, and they stay. But that's not how it works. Not in my world. She turned toward him. What happened? Ethan. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke again. Caroline, my ex-fiancée. She left when the company collapsed, said she couldn't build a life on uncertainty. I don't blame her. I was broken. But I learned something: people love you when you're winning. They disappear when you fall. Emma's throat tightened. Maybe she didn't know how to stay. Or maybe I didn't give her a reason to, he said softly. Since then, I've made sure no one gets close enough to choose. She wanted to say something, to tell him not everyone leaves, not everyone wants something in return, but the words stuck in her chest. Instead, she said quietly, maybe that's why you chose me. His eyes met hers, searching. Why do you think that? Because I have nothing to gain from you, she said, and nothing to lose. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he looked away, toward the bay, his voice almost tender. That might be exactly what I need. The night deepened around them. Below, waves lapped gently against the pier, steady and patient. The city hummed alive, indifferent, eternal. Emma leaned on the railing, her shoulder brushing his. Do you ever get tired of pretending all the time? Then stop, she said simply. Just for tonight. He glanced at her, surprised. But she wasn't teasing. Her eyes were calm, clear, reflecting the same exhaustion he carried. Slowly, he exhaled, and for the first time, the careful armor he wore began to fall away. They stayed like that, two people standing side by side, not as billionaire and librarian, not as employer and hired companion, but simply as two souls who'd been hurt enough to understand silence. After a while, Ethan said, You know, you were right earlier. It is lonely, but it's quieter that way. Safe. Emma smiled faintly. Safe isn't always the same as living. He turned toward her again, and the way he looked at her made her heart stutter. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was something rarer, recognition. The wind lifted her hair, brushing it against his sleeve. Neither of them moved. Finally, Ethan said, You make it hard to stay behind walls. Then maybe you shouldn't, she whispered. They stood there until the music from the ballroom faded, until the laughter became just echoes through glass. The night held its breath around them. When they finally went inside, neither spoke, but something had changed, something small, unspoken, impossible to undo. Later, in her hotel room, Emma sat by the window, watching the fog roll in from the bay. She could still feel the warmth of his hand when he'd brushed hers goodnight, the softness in his voice when he said, Thank you for being here. And as the city lights dimmed into the quiet hum of midnight, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore, not of him, not of the contract, not of the strange path they'd both stepped onto. Because for the first time, Ethan Hale had looked at her not as a deal to be kept, but as a person who made him remember how to feel. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm, the night breathed steady, and somewhere between fear and faith, two wounded hearts began to learn what it meant to trust again. The fog had begun to roll in from the bay again, wrapping the city in a soft silver haze. The lights of San Francisco shimmered faintly through it, blurred and distant, like memories half forgotten. On the balcony of his suite, Ethan stood alone, one hand resting on the cold iron railing, the other holding a glass he hadn't touched in a while. Below, the hum of the city carried upward laughter from a nearby street, the faint whistle of the wind through the harbor cranes, the heartbeat of a world that kept moving no matter who stopped to feel it. Inside, the last of the event staff were clearing up. Emma had stayed to help fold table linens, though she hadn't been asked. It was her way, quiet hands finding small, kind things to do when she didn't know how to fill the silence. When she finally stepped out onto the balcony, Ethan didn't turn right away, but he sensed her. Somehow, her presence had a weight, gentle, steady, impossible to ignore. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice low, rougher than usual. "I could say the same to you," she answered, leaning lightly on the railing beside him. Her hair was loose now, a few strands brushing her cheek in the wind. He exhaled, the sound soft, almost a sigh. "I can't sleep in hotels. Too much noise. Too much pretending." She glanced at him. Pretending what? He took a long moment before answering. That everything's fine. The way he said it, plain, almost tired, made her heart ache a little. For all his composure, she could feel the loneliness radiating off him. It wasn't loud or visible. It was quiet, buried deep, like something he'd learned to live with for too long. For a while, they just stood there. The night wrapped around them like a secret. The wind brushed against their coats, carrying the faint scent of salt and city rain. "Emma," he said finally, "you do something strange to me." She turned to him, startled. What do you mean?" He gave a soft, almost self-deprecating laugh. "You make me remember who I was, before all of this. Before money, before headlines, before I started building walls around everything I cared about." She watched him carefully. His face in the dim light looked different, not polished, not guarded, just human. "And who was that?" she asked gently. His gaze dropped to the glass in his hand. "Someone who believed people were good. That love was enough. That if you worked hard, you deserve happiness." He shook his head slowly. "The world doesn't work that way. Emma, not anymore." She took a step closer. "Maybe the world didn't change. Ethan, maybe you just stopped letting it reach you." He looked at her then, really looked as if searching her face for the lie, the agenda, the angle, but there wasn't one, just the quiet conviction in her eyes, soft and certain. "I've seen how people look at you," she continued. "They think you're cold, ruthless, but I don't think that's true." He frowned slightly. "No," she shook her head. "I think you're just protecting something broken." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "You talk like you can see through everything." "I don't," she said. "I just recognize pain when I see it." The words landed between them like something fragile. He turned away, looking back toward the bay, his reflection trembling in the glass door behind him. "Caroline used to say I didn't feel enough," he said quietly. "But the truth was, I felt too much. I just didn't know where to put it." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe that's what happens when you care deeply. The world starts to hurt in places no one else can see." He smiled faintly, the expression sad but genuine. "You really do have a way with words, don't you?" She shrugged, eyes still on the horizon. "Maybe I just say what people are too afraid to." There was a long pause then, not uncomfortable, but full, the kind of silence that carries more meaning than words ever could. Ethan set his glass down on the railing and turned toward her. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, though there was no real conviction behind it. "You're kind. The world I live in, it ruins people like you." Emma met his gaze. "Maybe it doesn't have to." For a heartbeat. They stood there, two shadows against the fog, two hearts caught in the same fragile rhythm. He reached out then, almost without thinking, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered for just a second longer than it should have, then dropped away. "You shouldn't believe in me." "Emma?" "I don't," she said, her tone steady. "But I believe in who you could be, if you stopped running from yourself." His breath caught. For someone so controlled, so precise, it was the first time she'd seen him look lost. The city below pulsed with distant life car lights drifting like fireflies, the hum of waves hitting the docks. "Finally," he said, You make it sound simple. She smiled softly. It's not, but maybe that's what makes it worth it. He stared at her for a long moment, long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. Then, quietly, you're dangerous. You know that. Why? Because you make people feel again. Her heart skipped, and she didn't answer. She just stood there beside him, the air between them charged and fragile. Neither moved, neither spoke. But in that stillness, something in both of them shifted, a quiet thawing, a recognition. After a while, she said, "You're not cold, Ethan. You're just hiding where it's safe." He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, his eyes softened completely. No walls, no defenses, just truth. "Then maybe," he said slowly, "I've been safe for too long." Their gazes held, steady and searching, until the world around them seemed to fade. The sound of the bay, the wind, the hum of the city, everything grew distant, and in that single, suspended moment, there was no contract, no facade, no distance. Just two people, standing on the edge of what could be something real. Emma looked away first, her voice barely a whisper. "We should go inside." Ethan nodded, though he didn't move. In a minute. As she turned, the faintest smile touched her lips, small, private, full of something she didn't dare name. Behind her, Ethan's eyes lingered on the spot where she'd stood, his heart heavy with the quiet realization that, for the first time in years, he wasn't numb. He was terrified, but alive. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, soft and golden, catching the edges of the white sheets. For the first time in months, the air around Emma didn't feel heavy. It felt still, like the world had paused to let her breathe. Lily was awake. Her face was pale but peaceful, her smile faint and sleepy as she squeezed Emma's hand. "Hey, you're crying," she whispered, her voice raspy from days of sleep. Emma laughed through the tears. "I know. I'm sorry. You just look alive." The surgeon had said the words that morning: successful procedure, full recovery expected. Emma had stood in the hallway, her legs weak, her hands pressed over her mouth, the weight of relief so strong it felt like breaking. Months of fear, debt, desperation gone, replaced by the quiet miracle of her sister's heartbeat, steady under the monitor's glow. Now, she sat by the bed, tracing her thumb over Lily's knuckles. "You're safe now," she whispered. Lily smiled, eyes fluttering closed again. "So are you." Emma didn't answer, but she knew it wasn't true. Safety wasn't something she'd ever known for long, not in the world outside this room, not with Ethan waiting somewhere back in Seattle, a man whose presence both steadied and unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. He'd told her to take as long as she needed. His voice over the phone had been even kind, maybe a little too controlled. "Your place is with her right now," he'd said. "We'll talk when you get back." She had wanted to hear something else. "I miss you. Come back soon." But that wasn't who he was. Or maybe it was who he was becoming, and that was what frightened him most. Days passed. The surgery went well. Lily's recovery was quick. By the 5th day, she was sitting up in bed, laughing again. Emma should have felt nothing but joy. But beneath the happiness was something quieter, heavier, a sense of distance she couldn't name. Ethan hadn't called since, not even a text. Only a brief message from his assistant confirming her flight back to Seattle. She tried not to think about it, but the silence between them had started to feel like another kind of truth. When she finally returned, the city greeted her with gray skies and the soft hum of rain. Hale Tower loomed against the skyline, tall and distant, its mirrored surface swallowing the clouds. The driver dropped her off at the side entrance. She walked in slowly, heart thudding harder than she expected. Ethan was waiting in his office, standing by the window just as before. The city light traced his profile sharp, composed, unreadable. "You're back," he said quietly. "I am," she replied, setting her bag down near the door. He turned to her, his face calm but distant. "How's Lily?" "She's recovering well. The doctors think she'll go home in a week." "That's good," he said. A pause. "I'm glad." Emma nodded, unsure what else to say. The air between them felt different now, heavier somehow, though neither had spoken more than a handful of words. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit, please. There's something I want to discuss." Her stomach tightened. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Ethan took a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the rain sliding down the glass. "You've fulfilled every term of our agreement," he began, "and more. You've been gracious, dependable, sincere. I couldn't have asked for more." He hesitated then, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk. "That's why I think it's best we end the arrangement early." For a second, she didn't understand. "End it." He nodded once. "You've done everything I asked. There's no reason to keep you tied to this contract." Her pulse quickened. "But we agreed on 6 weeks." "I know," he said quietly. "I've already arranged full payment for the remainder of the term. You're free to go." The words fell like something heavy between them. Free. It should have sounded like relief, but instead, it sounded like goodbye. She searched his face. "Is that what you really want?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the window. "I think it's what's best." Best for who, she asked softly. Ethan exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Emma, this whatever it is, it's not simple. You came into my life for a reason, a practical one, and I've let it become something else." Her heart sank. Something else? His gaze flicked to hers then, raw and unguarded for the briefest second. "Something I can't afford." The rain outside beat harder against the glass. She stood slowly, her voice barely steady. "You think feelings are something you can afford or not afford. It's not about money. Then what is it about?" "Ethan," she whispered. "Because if this is about your past, if you're afraid of feeling something real again, then you're punishing the wrong person." He looked pained, almost angry at himself. "You don't understand." "Then help me," she said. "Make me understand." He ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. "I don't know how to do this. Emma, to let someone in again, to want something that can't be controlled or predicted." Her throat tightened. "So you'd rather lose it than risk it?" He said nothing. And that silence, that stubborn, heartbreaking silence, told her everything. For a long moment, they just stood there. The sound of rain filled the space between them, steady and relentless. "Finally," she said, "you're not afraid of me. Ethan, you're afraid of yourself." His breath caught, but he didn't stop her when she picked up her bag, didn't reach out when she stepped toward the door. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly. When the elevator doors closed, Ethan stayed where he was, unmoving, hands trembling slightly at his sides. He'd told himself he was doing the right thing, that letting her go was an act of control, not fear. But as the elevator descended and her presence slipped further away, the truth hit him like a punch to the chest. He wasn't freeing her, he was losing her. And for the first time in years, the man who had everything stood alone in his glass tower, staring at his own reflection and saw not power, not control, but a man who had finally learned how to care and didn't know what to do with it. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, Ethan Hale's heart began to break quietly, like glass under pressure. The elevator doors had barely closed before Emma turned back. Her reflection in the mirrored wall stared at her, pale, uncertain, but alive with something fierce. She couldn't leave. Not like this. Not after everything they'd been through. After the way his voice had cracked when he said goodbye without saying it. She pressed the button for the top floor again, her heartbeat loud and wild in her ears. When the doors slid open, Ethan was still in his office, standing exactly where she'd left him, frozen, staring out the window as the rain poured down the glass. He didn't hear her at first, or maybe he thought she was just a memory his mind was playing back too loudly. "Ethan." Her voice broke the silence like a breath-breaking water. He turned, startled. "Emma, what are you doing?" She didn't let him finish. "You can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry through the room. "You can't keep running from what makes you human." He blinked, as if her words had struck something deep. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are," she cut in. "You push people away the second they matter. You call it protection, but it's fear. Ethan, you're afraid of being happy because you think you don't deserve it." The rain outside hit harder, a storm gathering around them. He looked at her, the woman he'd tried to send away, standing there drenched in conviction, her eyes fierce with truth. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Then make me," she said. He hesitated. His hand went to the back of his neck, his shoulders tense. "When you've built a life out of surviving loss," he said slowly, "you start mistaking loneliness for control. It's easier that way. Safer." "Safer doesn't mean better," she whispered. "It just means emptier." He looked at her for a long moment, and for once. There was no distance in his eyes, just exhaustion and something breaking loose beneath it. "I don't know how to do this." "Emma," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to love anymore." She stepped closer. "Then let me teach you." The room seemed to still around them. The hum of the city faded. Even the rain outside softened, as if it, too, was holding its breath. He shook his head, half in disbelief. "You shouldn't want to fix someone like me." "I'm not here to fix you," she said. "I'm here to remind you that you're not broken." Her words were soft, but they landed deep. Ethan's breath caught. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. No logic, no walls, no careful phrases to hide behind. Just silence. She took another step toward him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off his skin, close enough to see the tired ache in his eyes. "You've spent so long building things that don't feel," she whispered. "But you're still here. You still feel. That's the bravest thing about you." He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, he looked like a man trying to stand still in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. "Emma," he breathed. "Shh," she said gently. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, until it rested against his chest. His heartbeat was strong beneath her palm, uneven but real. "See, it still works. You just forgot what it's for." He opened his eyes then, and she saw everything he'd tried to hide. The fear, the longing, the unbearable tenderness of a man who'd forgotten what love felt like until it was standing in front of him. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "You don't have to," she whispered. "Just don't run." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan's hand rose, hesitant, brushing her cheek. The touch was careful, reverent, as if he was afraid she might disappear. "Emma." Her name on his lips wasn't a word. It was a confession. She leaned into his touch. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to know how. You just have to let yourself feel it." Something broke then, not in pain, but in release. He closed the distance between them, his forehead resting against hers. The air between them trembled, warm and alive. When their lips finally met, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth or practiced. It was real. A kiss born from months of restraint, from loneliness and hope, and the fragile courage it takes to start again. It was soft at first, then desperate, then still again, as if both of them were afraid to move, afraid the moment would end if they breathed too loudly. When they pulled apart, Emma's eyes glistened, not from tears, but from something deeper recognition. Ethan looked at her, his voice rough, unsteady. "What are you doing to me?" She smiled faintly, brushing her thumb against his jaw. "Nothing you didn't already want." He laughed then, a sound low and broken and beautiful, the kind of laugh that comes after too many years of silence. For a while, they just stood there, holding each other in the dim light of the office, the rain tracing lines down the windows behind them. Ethan's hand rested at the small of her back, her head against his shoulder. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow, or consequences, or how fragile everything felt. He was just there, with her, breathing the same air, feeling the same pulse, alive in a way he hadn't been in years. When she finally spoke again, her voice was soft against his chest. "See, it's not so hard to be human." He smiled into her hair. "With you, it isn't." The storm outside began to quiet, the sound of the rain easing into rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew this moment would change everything. He didn't know what came next, whether it would last, whether he even knew how to deserve it, but he didn't care. For now, it was enough. Enough to feel, enough to trust, enough to begin. And as the lights dimmed around them, the world outside kept spinning, but for the first time, neither of them was running anymore. Morning sunlight fell through the kitchen window, spilling across the counter and the stack of mismatched mugs that Emma loved too much to replace. The coffee machine hummed softly. The world felt still not empty, just peaceful. For the first time in a long time, her days had rhythm again. She still worked at the small library on Maple Street, still took the same route home, past the park with the old oak tree and the flower stand run by Mrs. Turner. Her life hadn't changed much on the surface, but inside, everything was different now. Ethan had insisted on keeping her world as it was. "I don't want to take you out of your life," he'd said one night. "I just want to be part of it." So, he came to her instead every evening, usually after dark, his car pulling quietly into the narrow street behind her building. Sometimes he'd bring takeout from her favorite diner. Sometimes, just himself, weary from meetings, his tie loose, his eyes soft. They never made plans. They didn't need to. Dinner would turn into laughter, laughter into quiet conversation, and quiet into the kind of silence that felt like safety, the kind that only existed between two people who'd stopped pretending. One night, he found her asleep on the couch, a book still open in her lap. He stood there for a long while, just watching her breathe. There was something grounding about the way she existed, unhurried, unguarded, so utterly herself. When she stirred, she smiled sleepily. "You're home," she murmured. Home. That word hit him harder than he'd expected, because somewhere along the way, she had become that. The calm after the storm, and yet, even peace has its weight. Ethan still spent his days at Hale Industries, still buried under deadlines and negotiations. But something in him had softened. His team noticed it. His assistant mentioned he smiled more, that his temper had quieted, that the man who once kept everyone at arm's length now held doors open and asked people how they were doing. They didn't know why. He didn't explain. But Emma could see it every evening when he walked through her door, the quiet fatigue of a man learning to live gently again. Their nights together had a rhythm, dinner, talk, her reading aloud from whatever novel she was buried in that week, his head leaning back against the sofa, eyes half closed, just listening. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, her hand finding his, the city sounds drifting in from the open window rain on pavement, a train passing in the distance, the hum of life going on outside their small, safe world. It wasn't a grand love story. It was something smaller, quieter. The kind that grows not from lightning, but from light slow, steady, and real, still. Every now and then, when the nights grew too quiet, Emma would catch him staring off into nothing, the lines on his face deeper, the look in his eyes far away. "Where are you?" she'd ask softly. He'd shake his head, just remembering. She never pressed. Some wounds didn't need questions, just patience. 3 months passed like that. Seasons shifting without them noticing. Lily had recovered fully and was back to her classes. Emma was back to her books, her small routines, her laughter. Ethan was still learning how to belong in moments that didn't demand control. It felt, for a while, like they'd both finally reached the other side of something. Until the morning it changed, it started like any other day. Emma woke early, tied her hair back, and left for the library with a thermos of coffee and a scarf looped twice around her neck. The air was crisp, the kind that carried the promise of fall. She was humming to herself when her phone buzzed a message from Ethan. "Dinner at 8, I'll pick you up." She smiled, typing back quickly. "Can't wait." But when 8 came, and the minutes stretched past 9, she began to wonder. He was never late without a word. She tried calling, no answer. A second time, voicemail. It wasn't until nearly 10 that she heard the sound of his car pulling up outside. When she opened the door, he looked off, his tie gone, his shirt rumpled, his eyes shadowed. "Ethan." He gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry I'm late." She stepped closer. "What happened?" "Just a long day," he said. His tone was even, but she could feel the distance under it. Something inside her stirred that quiet, instinctive knowing that peace rarely lasts without being tested. Later that night, when he fell asleep on her couch, she sat beside him, watching the faint lines of tension still etched into his face. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "You can tell me anything," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." He stirred slightly but didn't wake. His hand, resting near hers, twitched as if reaching for something even in sleep. Emma looked at him. This man who had rebuilt her faith in gentleness, and for a fleeting moment, a shadow crossed her heart, a feeling she couldn't name, something waiting at the edge of all they'd built. Outside. Rain began again, soft against the glass. The streetlight flickered once, then steadied. She leaned back, her fingers intertwined with his. It had taken them both so long to find this quiet, to find each other. But even in that calm, she felt it, the subtle tremor beneath the surface, the breath before another storm, and somewhere, far away in the city, a story that Ethan thought he'd left behind had already begun to find its way back to him. He shifted slightly in his sleep, brow furrowing. Emma tightened her grip on his hand. "Whatever it is," she murmured, "we'll face it." The rain fell harder, a steady rhythm against the window, and for the first time in months, the peace that had wrapped around them didn't feel endless anymore. It felt fragile like glass, beautiful, but waiting to break. The storm arrived on an ordinary afternoon, not the kind that rattles windows, but the kind that slips quietly through open doors. Emma had spent the morning arranging flowers in the living room of Ethan's house. The space still felt new to her, though she'd been coming there for weeks now, filling it with her small touches: a vase of daisies, a stack of library books, the faint smell of cinnamon she brought with her every time she baked. The house, once cold and silent, had begun to breathe again. She was humming softly when the doorbell rang. Ethan was still at work, and she assumed it was a delivery. She wiped her hands and went to open the door. The woman standing outside was the kind of beautiful that made silence feel sharp. Perfect posture, a designer coat, lipstick the color of old wine. Her smile was polite, but her eyes, those eyes were cold steel. "Hello," the woman said smoothly. "You must be Emma." Something in her tone made Emma's stomach tighten. "Yes. Can I help you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, her smile widening. "I'm Caroline." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Caroline, the one from Ethan's past. The ghost he never quite exorcised. Emma blinked, caught between shock and confusion. "Oh," she said softly. "I didn't realize. I imagine you didn't." Caroline interrupted, stepping inside without being invited. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the quiet house. "I was in town for a few days. Thought I'd stop by and see how he's been. Keeping himself..." Emma closed the door slowly. "Ethan's not here right now." "That's all right," Caroline said, walking through the living room as though she still owned it. "I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear I stopped in." Her eyes swept the room, the flowers, the books, the faint trace of Emma's presence in every small corner. "You've been making yourself comfortable." "I see." Emma's voice stayed calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm just helping him keep the place warm." Caroline turned, her gaze sharp and amused. "Helping him. That's one way to put it." She took a slow step closer. "Tell me." Emma, What exactly did he promise you? A new life, security, love. Emma drew in a steady breath. He didn't promise me anything. Oh, sweetheart, Caroline said softly, almost pitying. He doesn't have to promise. He gives just enough for you to believe he means it. That's what he does. That's what he did with me. The words were sharp, but what cut deeper was the calm certainty in them. Caroline's smile didn't falter as she continued. I'll admit, you're not what I expected. He always had a thing for simplicity, something to make him feel human again. But he gets bored, you know? He always does. Emma felt her throat tighten. She wanted to walk away, to ask this stranger to leave, but something in Caroline's voice held her there, that poised cruelty, the kind that came from knowing exactly where to press. I'm not you, Emma said quietly. Caroline's laugh was soft and elegant, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. No, you're not. You're not even close. But that's what makes it so predictable, isn't it? The charity case, the damaged man. It's such a storybook pairing. He saves you. You heal him. Until he remembers he doesn't need saving. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. You should go. Caroline took a slow step forward, lowering her voice. He bought you, didn't he? Or was it the other way around? She smiled thinly. I almost feel sorry for you. You actually believe this is love. Emma's chest tightened as the words sank in. She wanted to shout, to defend him, to defend herself. But the old insecurities rose too fast, too familiar. The auction, the money, the way everything had started. Caroline saw it, that flicker in Emma's eyes, and smiled like someone who just confirmed what she already knew. Don't worry, she said lightly, reaching for her purse. I won't tell him I came. It would only make things awkward. She turned toward the door, then paused. Though, if you're smart, you'll leave before he does. He's never been very good at keeping things permanent. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence that followed was unbearable. Emma stood still for a long time, her breath shallow, her hands gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. The smell of cinnamon still hung in the air. The flowers she'd arranged looked suddenly out of place, too bright against the quiet ache of the room. She tried to shake it off, to remind herself that Caroline's words were nothing more than venom from a woman who'd lost what she once had. But doubt has a way of echoing in the places where love is still fragile. By the time Ethan came home that night, the house was dark. He found her sitting by the window, the lights off, her reflection faint in the glass. Emma, he said softly, setting down his keys. Why are you sitting in the dark? She didn't turn around. You had a visitor today. He frowned. Who, Caroline? The air shifted. The silence between them grew heavier. She said she wanted to see how you've been keeping yourself. Emma continued quietly. I guess now I know what she meant. Ethan crossed the room in 2 steps. She came here. Emma nodded. She said some things. He knelt in front of her, trying to catch her gaze. What did she say? Emma finally looked at him, her eyes wide, tired, searching. That I'm just something you'll outgrow, that you bought me, that I make you feel human, but only until you remember what you really are. The words hung between them, sharp and heavy. Ethan's face went pale. Emma, don't listen to her. She's your past, Emma whispered, cutting him off. But somehow, she still knows how to hurt your present. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, her voice trembling. Ethan, I need to know something. When you look at me, is it real, or is it just something you're trying to believe in? He froze, the question catching him completely off guard. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far off, low, distant, inevitable. She stood slowly, her reflection in the window now beside his. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was enough. For my family, for the world. And now, I don't want to spend it proving it to you too. Her voice broke then, soft but sure. If this is real, Ethan, show me. If it's not, don't keep me here out of kindness. He opened his mouth, but no words came, only the sound of the storm growing closer. And as the first raindrops hit the glass, Emma turned away, not in anger, but in the quiet ache of someone who'd just been reminded how easily peace can crumble when the past decides to knock on the door. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the scent of it still lingered in the air, that quiet, heavy stillness that comes after a storm. Emma sat by the window of the living room, knees drawn to her chest, the hem of her sweater brushing against the floor. The city lights shimmered faintly beyond the glass, blurred by a thin film of mist. She hadn't slept. The conversation with Caroline had replayed in her mind again and again, each word cutting a little deeper with every memory. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there when the sound of the front door unlocking broke the silence. Ethan's footsteps were soft but certain, the kind of steps of a man who carried guilt in his pockets. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, still, small, wrapped in silence. "Emma." She didn't look up. "You saw her, didn't you?" He exhaled slowly. "Yes." Her voice trembled. "You should have told me she'd come back. I didn't know she would," he said quietly. "I found out after she left. I'm sorry." The apology fell between them, too light for the weight it needed to carry. Emma finally turned toward him. Did she tell the truth? His brows furrowed, about what she held his gaze steady, fragile, searching, about me, about why you chose me. Did you ever wonder if it was just pity? He froze, as though the question had punched the air from his chest. "Emma, no. She said you bought me to feel human again," she continued, her voice cracking. "That I was just part of some story you told yourself to believe you'd changed. And the worst part is, a piece of me believed her. The quiet after that was unbearable." Ethan crossed the room slowly, lowering himself to his knees in front of her. "Look at me." Her eyes met his, wet with unshed tears. "I didn't buy you," he said softly. "I saved you from something I couldn't stand to see. Maybe that started as guilt, or anger at the world, or at myself, I don't know. But it didn't stay that way. Emma, you became the thing I looked for every morning, the reason I wanted to come home. You became the proof that there's still good in me." Her tears finally fell. "Then why does it hurt so much to believe that? Because you're still carrying every time someone made you feel small," he whispered. "And I'm still carrying every time I failed someone I loved." He reached for her hand, hesitant, his voice trembling. "But I don't regret a single thing that led me here. Not 1 second. She pulled her hand back gently, as if afraid of what she might feel if she held on. "Ethan, if I don't belong in your world with your people, your company, everything you've built, what then?" His expression softened. "Then I'll leave it." She blinked, startled. "You'd walk away from all of it I already did once," he said. "When it took everything from me, I learned I could rebuild. But I can't rebuild you. I can't replace what you've given me." He swallowed hard. "You're not part of my world. Emma, you are my world." Her lips trembled, the weight of his words both beautiful and unbearable. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said simply. "All of it." He stood and took her hands in his, lifting her to her feet. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low, certain now. "You are not a charity case. You're not something I bought or something I need to prove. You're the reason I stopped feeling empty. You taught me that peace doesn't live in power, or money, or control. It lives in moments like this." He stepped closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't regret choosing you. Emma, not for a heartbeat." Her eyes closed as the tears came freely now. "But I don't fit. Ethan," she whispered, "I don't belong to the life you live." "Then I'll make a new one," he said without hesitation. "One where you do." She let out a soft, broken laugh through her tears. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he admitted, "but neither was loving you, and I did that anyway." For a long moment, Neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with the kind of truth that only comes after pain, the quiet understanding that love isn't perfect, but chosen. Emma's fingers tightened around his. "You'd really give it all up," he smiled faintly. "I already did the day you walked into my life. Everything after that was just noise." Outside, the mist had turned to fog, curling around the windows like a shroud. The city lights blurred until the world looked softer, gentler. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I'm scared," she murmured. He wrapped his arms around her. "So am I. But being scared means it matters." They stood that way for what felt like hours, two people holding on to something fragile, something real. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I don't need the world to understand us. Ethan, I just need to believe you mean it." He tilted her chin up gently, meeting her eyes. "I mean every word." She smiled through her tears, her voice trembling, but sure. "Then I'll stop running." He exhaled, relief softening his features. "Good," he whispered, "because I'm done running too." They stayed there, no more words, no explanations. Just quiet breathing and the hum of the city outside, the faint rhythm of two hearts learning how to sync again. When she finally looked up at him, there was something new in her eyes, not certainty, but trust, the fragile, trembling kind that takes everything to give. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "We'll figure it out. Emma, the world can wait." She nodded slowly. Maybe for once, it should. The fog thickened outside, wrapping the house in soft gray light. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed steady, patient, as if marking the beginning of something quiet but unbreakable. And as Ethan pulled her close, his words lingered in the air, gentle and absolute. "If you don't belong to my world, then I'll leave it to live in yours." The ballroom glittered beneath 1,000 crystal lights. Cameras flashed like bursts of lightning. Voices overlapped laughter, whispers, champagne glasses clinking. It was the kind of night that belonged to people who had never known hunger, fear, or shame. And yet, there she was. Emma stood near the edge of it all, her hand resting gently against her clutch, trying to steady her breathing. This was Ethan's world, the place he had built and fought for, where reputation was currency and vulnerability was weakness. Tonight, Hale Industries was unveiling its new humanitarian tech initiative, a project meant to merge innovation with compassion. It was Ethan's proudest achievement and his most public moment. He had asked her to come, not as an obligation, not as a prop, but as herself, still. As Emma looked around at the glittering gowns and perfect smiles, she couldn't help but feel like an intruder. The whispers had already begun. "Is that her?" someone murmured. "The girl from the auction. Unbelievable. Only Ethan Hale." Each word pressed against her skin like cold glass. She was about to step back when she felt a familiar hand slide into hers. Firm. Steady. Ethan's voice came softly beside her ear. "Don't move away." She turned, and for a moment, everything around them faded. He looked different tonight, not because of the tuxedo or the cameras, but because his eyes had lost their fear. "They're looking," she whispered. "Let them," he said. He led her through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations paused. The air felt electric, charged with curiosity and judgment. Emma could feel her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the microphones could pick it up. Caroline was there too, radiant, composed, standing near the front row of reporters. Her lips curved in a smile that was all venom and elegance. When her eyes met Emma's, there was triumph in them, as if she'd already won. The CEO of Hale Industries stepped onto the small stage, introducing Ethan, calling him a visionary, a leader, a man whose work continues to shape the future. Applause followed, loud and glittering. Ethan nodded politely, but his gaze never left Emma. He took the microphone. His voice, when it came, was calm, grounded. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. This project is more than technology. It's about connection, the kind that makes us human, that reminds us of what matters when the noise fades. He paused. The room quieted. I've spent most of my life chasing success, building walls so high that no one could ever reach me. But the truth is, walls don't protect, they isolate. His eyes found Emma again, and I learned that lesson the hard way. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Caroline's smile faltered. I made mistakes, he continued. I hurt people. I forgot that love, real love, isn't a transaction, it's a choice. Then, without warning, he stepped down from the stage and crossed the polished floor toward Emma. Cameras clicked wildly. People leaned forward. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. He stopped in front of her, reaching for her hand. Some of you know her, he said, his voice low but clear. Some of you think you do. Emma froze, every eye in the room on her. Ethan squeezed her hand, once a silent promise. This woman, he said, his voice steady, is not a contract. She's not a story to fill your headlines. She's the reason I believe in redemption. She's the person who taught me that worth isn't measured in wealth, and that love doesn't need permission to exist. The room fell silent. No one moved. He looked at her, then really looked at her as if the rest of the world no longer existed. Her name is Emma Lawson, he said softly, and she's the woman I love. For a heartbeat. There was only the sound of camera shutters and the low hum of disbelief. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then growing, spreading through the hall like a tide breaking free. Emma's vision blurred, not from the lights, but from the tears she'd been holding back. Ethan's thumb brushed against her knuckles, grounding her. She couldn't speak, didn't need to. The truth was already there, between them, visible to anyone who cared to see. Caroline stood frozen, her painted smile cracked into disbelief. For the first time, the control she'd always worn like armor was gone. She turned away, her exit unnoticed by most. When the applause faded, Ethan leaned close. His words meant only for her. You told me once I didn't know how to love, he whispered. Maybe I still don't, but I know how to choose. Emma smiled through her tears. And you chose me. He nodded, his voice barely audible. Every day, in every way. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the noise had dimmed, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind carried the faint hum of traffic, the soft glow of streetlights painting their faces in gold. She rested her head on his shoulder. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, he murmured. I did. Why, he turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Because I wanted the world to see what I see. Her eyes lifted to his. And what's that? He smiled faintly. Strength, grace, the person who saved me without ever trying to. She laughed softly, a sound full of warmth and disbelief. You really think we won tonight? Ethan looked out at the city below. We didn't win anything, he said. We just stopped hiding. For a moment, they stood in silence, two silhouettes framed against the lights of Seattle, the night air cool against their skin. Emma's hand slipped into his again. So, what happens now? He turned to her, his expression soft. Now, he said, now we live. And for the first time, those words didn't feel like a promise. They felt like a beginning. Below them, the city moved on, unaware, uncaring, but on that balcony, amid the fading echoes of applause and the soft murmur of the wind, two people finally let go of fear. Not because the world believed in them, but because they finally believed in themselves. The lake shimmered beneath the morning sun, the kind of light that looked like forgiveness, soft, gold, endless. The garden by Lake Tahoe was quiet except for the sound of wind moving gently through the pines and the laughter of a few close friends. White chairs lined the grass, petals scattered by the breeze. It wasn't a grand wedding, not the kind with diamonds and orchestras. It was simple, honest, the way they had always been. Emma stood barefoot on the soft earth, her dress brushing the tips of the grass. The lake behind her mirrored the sky, still and deep, like the calm she'd searched for all her life. Across from her stood Ethan, no tuxedo, no formality, just a man in a simple linen suit with his heart wide open. When he took her hands, his voice was quiet. "You once told me you didn't belong in my world," he said. "Turns out you were the world I was trying to find." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "And you were the silence I didn't know I needed." Their vows were short. There were no rehearsed lines, no spectacle, only truth. And when they kissed, it wasn't applause that followed just the sound of waves kissing the shore and the wind sighing through the trees. 6 months later, their life together found rhythm in the ordinary morning coffee, late-night talks, the smell of rain on the deck. They built something steady, something that didn't need to be loud to be real. 2 years passed quietly, beautifully, together. They founded the Lawson Hale Foundation, a small but powerful organization that helped families with children in need of surgery, families who once stood where Emma had, counting dollars and days and prayers. The foundation grew faster than they expected. But for Ethan, every child saved wasn't a headline or a number. It was a piece of redemption. Sometimes, when the work became overwhelming, he would find Emma in the garden, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, reading under the same tree where they'd said their vows. He would stand behind her, his shadow mingling with hers, and for a moment, everything in the world felt right again. One Sunday morning, the sky was pale with the promise of spring. They sat on the porch overlooking the lake, the air cool and clean. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, her fingers curled around a warm mug. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she asked softly, "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" Ethan turned to her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a quiet smile. "Only that I didn't love you sooner." She looked up at him then, her eyes full of light and memory. "We didn't save each other. Ethan," she whispered, "we chose each other." He nodded, his hand finding hers, and that made all the difference. They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. A bird landed nearby, the sound of its wings breaking the stillness for only a moment. Somewhere across the lake, a child laughed, the echo carrying softly through the morning air. Emma's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sunlight met the water. The reflection shimmered two halves of the same light, inseparable. She thought of how far they'd come from fear, from loneliness, from the belief that love was something to be earned or bought. Now, it was simply there, quiet, steady, chosen. Ethan reached over, brushing his thumb against her wrist. "What are you thinking about?" She smiled faintly. "That piece doesn't look like I thought it would. What does it look like now?" She tilted her head toward him. "It looks like this." The wind moved through the trees again, lifting her hair, carrying the scent of pine and morning dew. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, not to hold the moment, but to let it pass through her, like time, like forgiveness. In the distance, the lake caught the light and scattered it like diamonds. Ethan followed her gaze, his hand still holding hers. Their fingers intertwined, not tightly, but enough. It wasn't the fairy tale ending people expected. There was no castle, no audience, no applause, just two hearts that had been broken, mended, and finally learned how to rest. And as the sun rose higher, spilling gold across the water, they sat there not as a man who had saved a woman, or a woman who had healed a man, but as two souls who had simply chosen to stay. The waves whispered against the shore, as if carrying their story away to somewhere beyond time. Emma leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. "We made it." Ethan smiled. "We did." The world around them quieted, wrapped in the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. Just the sound of their laughter, the warmth of the sun, and the steady rhythm of love, not perfect, not loud, but true. And somewhere in that stillness, under the soft shimmer of the lake, their story settled not as an ending, but as a beginning that finally knew how to stay. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive as a grand gesture. It grows quietly, in the corners of our hardest days. Emma and Ethan's story reminds us that redemption often begins where pride ends, and that true connection isn't built from wealth, power, or perfection, but from presence. We all carry scars, moments that made us doubt our worth, times we mistook being needed for being loved. Yet, somewhere along the way, life gives us a choice to close our hearts and stay safe, or to open them and truly live. For those who have been hurt or misunderstood, this story is a gentle reminder. Healing doesn't come from being rescued, but from being seen. Love, at its purest, isn't about saving someone. It's about choosing them again and again, even when life gets quiet, even when fear whispers otherwise. So, wherever you are in your journey, remember, this peace doesn't mean the absence of storms. It means finding someone or something worth holding on to when they come. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply to believe that we still deserve a softer kind of love. Thank you, dear listeners, for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart even just a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing gentle, heartfelt stories like this one to life. Every view, every comment, every click reminds us that kindness still matters, that stories about love, dignity, and hope still have a place in this world. So, stay with us. More stories are waiting, and maybe the next one will be yours.